Canada Day. It's the one day when we shoot off fireworks regardless of the environment. It's the one day when we display our flag with no shame. It's the one day when we slather mousse with maple-flavored barbecue sauce and I love it. But in all seriousness, what is Canada Day? What are we celebrating? Well, you're about to find out. Before we get to Canada's birthday in 1867, we're going to have to rewind 100 years. The year is 1763 now, and England and France have just finished the 7 Years' War, also called the French Indian War. We find them in Paris signing the Treaty of Paris, which cedes New France, which is present-day Canada, over to England. So New France is now renamed Upper and Lower Canada, which would be Ontario and Quebec present day. So now, Canada belongs to England, and this is the start of our history as a British colony. 20 years later, we find England back in Paris, signing another Treaty of Paris. This is the treaty that ends the American Revolution. With the end of the American Revolution, we have to zoom in on a certain group of people that fled the United States after that end. They were called the United Empire Loyalists, or just simply Loyalists. And they were loyal to the British Crown. They either fought for Britain in the American Revolution or they were sympathetic to Britain. During the chaos after the American Revolution, before the American Constitution was drafted, there was a lot of chaos, and Loyalist property was oftentimes confiscated. So the British Empire compensated these Loyalists with property up in Upper Canada, which is, as we talked about, is Ontario. So these Loyalists flood up into areas like Kingston and Southern Ontario. It's around 60 to 80,000 of these Loyalists. That really creates a pro-Britain environment in Southern Ontario, and that pro-Britain sentiment carries on to the rest of Canadian history. Canada's next major event falls in 1812. Britain had been fairly aggressive on the world trade stage and had forced several American officers into the British Navy. America took this as acts of aggression, and so on June 18, 1812, they declared war on Britain. So on July 12, 1812, American forces march on Windsor, Ontario in order to liberate Canadians from oppressive British rule. But remember all those Loyalists that came up there? By this time in 1812, about half of Canada's English-speaking population was either Loyalist or descended from Loyalists, and they still had hard feelings about the American Revolution and being forced out of America. So the Americans got a much different response than what they thought they were gonna get. After 3 long years of war, the Canadians had finally beat the Americans off their territory, and it all culminated in burning down the American capital. But fears of future US aggression still remained in Canadian politics and would still be prevalent up until the founding of Canada. That brings us to 1837 and 1838. Canada wasn't without its own hard feelings about British colonial rule, and one of the key figures in the objection to colonial rule was a certain man named William Lyon Mackenzie, not to be confused with William Lyon Mackenzie King, who would later be the Prime Minister of Canada. This is his namesake in 1837. William Lyon Mackenzie wanted legislative reform, but not complete independence from Great Britain. And when his efforts failed for reform, he resorted to violence. That brings us to early December in 1837. So he collects a small group of rebellious settlers and they march on Toronto. They take a short stop at Montgomery's Tavern, and that's where the British militia meet them. There's a short skirmish, a few die on either side, and eventually the rebels lose. William Lyon Mackenzie would then flee to the United States, where he would stay until 1849. This was not the only rebellion of 1837. There was actually one just a couple weeks earlier in November, led by a certain man named Louis-Joseph Papineau. Now this rebellion was a little bit more violent and a little bit more well prepared. Papineau, for the same reasons as Mackenzie, leads his own small group of rebels to try and overthrow British rule. This is basically similar to the Mackenzie Rebellion, but with a Quebecois flavor. In the end, Papineau's forces are also defeated, but the message finally gets to the British authority, and they send Lord Durham to do a report, which eventually culminates into unifying Upper and Lower Canada into a province called Canada. So in 1840, Upper and Lower Canada were unified into the province of Canada. By 1864, the maritime colonies are considering their own similar union. This would be between Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI. So in September 1st of 1864, 23 delegates arrive in Charlottetown, PEI to discuss this union. To this convention in Charlottetown arrived delegates from the province of Canada, and these include notable names like Sir John A. Macdonald, George Brown, and Georges-Étienne Cartier. Their suggestion to this conference is to instead pursue a federal union amongst all the colonies of British North America. Pretty soon, the idea of a maritime union is set aside, and all the delegates are focused on this federal union idea. And by the time this convention ends on September 9th, the majority of the delegates had agreed that a federal union should be pursued. All except for PEI, who still questioned whether a federal union would limit their autonomy. So PEI, as a result, would stay out of the Confederation until 7 years after it had been started. That was the first convention. Now we get to the second convention in Quebec City just 1 month later in October of 1864. And to this convention arrived 33 delegates, including some from Newfoundland just as observers. And this is where the nitty-gritty detail begins, because now that they've decided to pursue a federal union, they have to decide their form of government and how everything should be run. Over the course of the 2 weeks of this Quebec Convention, the whole plan for British North America is hashed out, including 72 resolutions over how the government is to be run and the jurisdiction of federal versus provincial government. Notable figures in this conference include, of course, Sir John A. Macdonald, George Brown, and Georges-Étienne Cartier, but there were other notable characters, including Samuel Leonard Tilley from New Brunswick and the Premier of Nova Scotia, Charles Tupper. These were major supporters of the Confederation. I have to put a caveat in here. Sir John A. Macdonald's position on this was that he was for a very strong federal government and not giving so much power to the provinces. We need to be mindful of the timing of this. This was right after the end of the American Civil War. And what these Fathers of Confederation saw, there was a lot of dissension amongst the states in the United States. They saw the United States as a failure because of the Civil War, and to prevent that, they would rather have a strong central government. That is why the federal government in Canada has so much power, and there's less power to the provinces. At the close of these 2 weeks, the 72 resolutions have been firmly drafted, and now all that's left to do is to push these through each province's parliament and to have them ratified. And here's where Confederation runs up against a delay. Debates begin to arise, especially in the maritime provinces, over certain policies in these 72 resolutions. And as a result, there's a 2-year delay approaching Confederation. Another delay in this happens in March of 1865, just a few months after the Quebec Conference. Samuel Leonard Tilley goes through an election and unfortunately loses his seat, and he is one of the big promoters for Confederation in New Brunswick. He is out of office for about a year and 3 months, during which time Confederation basically stalls as these resolutions are debated through the parliaments of each province. One significant event rushes Confederation more than anything else could. And here's where we come to the Fenian Rebellion. So the Fenian Brotherhood was a radical group of Irish settlers who were very against British rule, and they blamed Britain for the Irish potato famine, which occurred in 1845. And that, combined with other grievances, made this Fenian Brotherhood very anti-Britain. Immediately following the Civil War, this Fenian Brotherhood decides to take matters into their own hands, and what they would like to do is to seize property in British North America, so in southern Ontario in particular. They want to seize property and then use that to trade it for Ireland's independence. This is the plan. On June 1st, 1866, about 600 to 800 Fenian Brotherhood members cross Niagara River and seize Fort Erie by surprise. Now, their whole plan doesn't come to fruition because they eventually have to flee Fort Erie due to the approach of the British militia. But these Fenian rebellions spark something in the minds of Canadian people. They begin to realize that they need to be stronger and more unified. The War of 1812 is still fresh in their minds, and they don't want to have a repeat. So this Fenian Rebellion basically speeds up Confederation. And as a result, there's an election in New Brunswick, and Samuel Leonard Tilley regains his seat. Now the stage is set for the final ratification of Canadian Confederation. That brings us to the third conference for the foundation of Canada. On December 4th, 1866, 16 delegates arrive in London, UK, to begin the final touches on their Confederation of Canada. Between December 4th, 1866 and February 1867, these 16 delegates take the 72 resolutions that they drafted in Quebec and put them into legislative form, and they create what's known as the British North America Act Bill. This bill would unite Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick into one unified economy. The British North America Act would finally pass British Parliament on March 29, 1867. It would receive royal assent from Queen Victoria, and it would come into full effect on July 1st, 1867. Now, some of you might be wondering why Britain would let these colonies go, seeing as how hard a fight they put up for the American colonies. By the time 1867 rolled around, the British government was putting too much money into British North America, or present-day Canada, and they were not receiving the same return from it. It was just simply too much money for them to invest. Another thing was that this country wasn't actually going to leave British rule. They were under the British Crown. In fact, we still are to this day. And that, coupled with the loyalty to the British Crown, this country would remain very much allied with Great Britain for years and years to come. Now, why am I telling you this? Because in Canada, we have lost our identity. We don't know our history. We don't know where we've come from. And with so many cultures flooding our country, we don't know who we are even. Multiculturalism is not really an identity. Here we are in this country and we mishmash everything together, but we don't know who we truly are. Canadians don't know their history. They don't know what this country was about. We were founded with the hope of peace, order, and good government. That was our founding. That's where Canada started. I know it's controversial, but diversity is not our strength. Multiculturalism is not our strength. Our strength lies in our unity. You see, if multiculturalism and diversity were our strength, Canada would be the most unified country in the world. But we're not. We have 3 provinces that are talking about separating, and we have more infighting and disunity than ever before in our country. We have no core identity. And one of the sad things in Canada is that our educational system is failing to teach Canadians our history. Many of the Canadians that I talk to don't know these things about our country. They don't know where we come from. And if we don't know where we come from, we have no identity. We don't know who we are. And we're basically lost and drifting and ready to be taken over by another country, pretty much. If we have no identity, who are we? This Canada Day, when you're out there having fun, think about this video. Think about Canada. Think about who we are as a country. And try and teach those around you to love our country and to love our heritage. We have a good heritage. It's not all evil, guys. We have a really good heritage in this country. So don't forget to thank God for Canada on this Canada Day. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button down below and feel free to subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Also, if you have a minute, put a comment down below of other topics about Canadian history that you would like to see. Bye.